chapter 7. I left my notes at home, and Trudy had to run back and get them for me. Thank her for that. It's hard to believe we're already in chapter 7, but we are. And it'll probably take a couple weeks to do chapter 7, but not much longer than that. Because a lot of this we're going to see here has to deal with these 144,000. Now, when we get to chapter 7, it's a parenthetical chapter, and that is the last seal is in chapter 8, verse 1. So that's how you know this is, it's a parenthesis. It's information that God wants you to have, but it may not be in sequence with everything that's going on. In fact, it probably is over a period of the next 42 months of the Great Tribulation, because I think these guys are called out, or sealed and called out right about the middle of the tribulation. So it's a parenthetical chapter. So let's start reading from verse 1 to verse 3. It says, "And after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads." So we'll stop with those 3 verses and cover that first. He mentions the 4 corners of the earth. And of course, you know, anybody else says that, nobody says a word. But when the Bible says that, then all the critics come out of the closet and say, well, that's not sorry, 4 corners, you know, round globe and all this. But yet everybody says it. I mean, the newspapers say it. The Marines, the recruiters say it to the 4 corners of the earth, you know, and travelers say it. But when God says it, all of a sudden it's inaccurate. Well, God says it because it's the simplest thing for you to understand. I mean, if he'd have talked about the 360-degree plane or whatever, or 360 degrees that there can be around this globe, you'd be like, what? What? I mean, nobody would understand it. So he gives it to you so you can understand it. But obviously he's talking about directions, north, south, east, and west. And the fact that you say the 4 corners of the earth, even if you don't know the breadth and depth of the earth, even if you don't know about Australia or Antarctica, you can still understand what he's saying. When he says the 4 corners of the earth, because you're covering every direction, it's understood. You're talking about the whole thing, right? Not that hard. I'll give you another example. Turn to Joshua chapter 10. This is one that, you know, and when I say that the Bible's not a science textbook, that's not what I mean. Or I shouldn't say it that way. The Bible's not written in science jargon. It is every bit a science book. And where it speaks on science, it speaks infallibly. It's not only that, but it's everything in between. It's an engineering manual. It's everything. Wherever it speaks, and on the things it speaks about, unless it's talking about a man's error, it speaks infallibly about it. And in Joshua chapter 10, verse 12, "Then spake Joshua to the Lord in that day, and the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed." Now immediately everybody loses it and says, well, it's the earth that's rotating, but you don't read that in the morning newspaper. You know, earth rise and earth set, do you? You never hear that. I don't care anywhere in the world, you will not hear earth rise and earth set. You will see sunset, sunrise. That's what you get, or sunrise, sunset. Even the moon rising and the moon setting. So when he says, "Sun, stand thou still," and the sun stood still and the moon stayed, what I'm thinking happened is that they're both visible. And I'll tell you when they're both visible. They're both visible probably toward evening, where one is rising on one part of the horizon. Thank you. Man, I wasn't going to get it. One's rising on one part of the horizon, and the other one's setting on the other part. And he didn't want it to set because he was still engaged in this battle. So that's when he asked the Lord to just... Now, to anyone observing on this earth, that sun stood still. You say, well, it had to be the earth. It doesn't matter. That sun was still in that sky. It stood still. And the moon didn't move either. They were motionless. They stayed right there. To anyone observing it. And if God wanted you to understand it, he wouldn't put it into scientific jargon because nobody would have understood it until now. So he gives it to you in a way that you can understand it. But it is in truth, it did stand still. Whether it's the earth standing still or the moon standing still, the thing or the sun standing still, the truth of the matter is it was still. Stayed in that sky, didn't move. It says, and the sun stood still and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and hasted not to go down about a whole day. So I was going to give you another one. Should I give you another one? Isaiah 40, verse 22. Now this is how God can get it over to somebody in 700 BC when he wrote Isaiah, or 100 AD, or 2000 AD, or 2025 AD. God wrote it so that everybody could at least understand something about it. When he says Isaiah 40:22, it is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers, that stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in. Now that circle of the earth, I think he's talking about a sphere because the only way it could be flat like a pancake and it be a circle is to be looking at it from only one direction. And then it has to be directly over it. Anything in an angle will give you a different shape. It'll look oblong or it'll look different. But if you've got a sphere in the sky, I don't care where you are in the universe, it's a circle. No matter what direction you look at it, up, down, you can go to the sides of it, above it, below it, it's still a sphere. And when he talks about that circle of earth, I believe that's what he's talking about. And I believe that Jesus confirms this in Luke chapter 17 when he says, verse 34 to 36, I tell you, in that night there shall be two men in one bed. The one shall be taken, and the other shall be left. Now, he doesn't say, and that day or the following day. He talks about the same night. Two women shall be grinding together. The one shall be taken, the other left. And then he says, two men shall be in the field. Well, two men aren't in the field in the middle of the night, but they are during the day. And he's telling you at the same time that you've got two men in a bed, in which, in the tribulation could very well be, especially if these are workers that are working fields, two men in a bed, and then two men shall be in the field at the same time, showing you that there's darkness on one side and there's daylight on the other. He said the one shall be taken, the other left. So you have here in Isaiah chapter 40 that the earth is a sphere, and day and night is happening at the same time. Isaiah wrote this several hundred years before a Greek philosopher named Pythagoras figured it out, or he read Isaiah 40. I kind of think, it's interesting that after Solomon gets done writing Ecclesiastes and Proverbs and Song of Solomon, all the wisdom, a lot of those wisdom books, all of a sudden here come our Greek philosophers, about 500 years later. And it's interesting that some of these things that are so far beyond science and so far ahead of science, but then a couple hundred years later, or even 1,000 years later, all of a sudden somebody shows up and they figure it out. Did they really figure it out, or did they just read it in the Bible and they're going, huh? And then they figured it out. Makes me kind of wonder. God forbid that we should give the Bible credit for anything. I mean, that's how the world is. I think people have actually found gold following the Bible because it tells you where there's some gold. Definitely telling you things that you wouldn't know, you would have no idea of unless you read it. There's some great wisdom in here, and there's also some great scientific discoveries that they didn't find out till, I mean, sometimes thousands of years later. These angels are holding back, in verse 1, they're holding the four winds of the earth. They're holding back these four winds of the earth, and it's coming from the four corners of the earth. Wind comes from only four directions. It can be mixed. I realize we've got 360 degrees, so there's all kind of by degree, but it's only coming from four different directions, whether it's mixed or not. Let's see here. And that wasn't, the whole point of that is, I have to look at my notes here. I usually review them just before I get up here, and I got to read what I put down. But men would not have understood in 100 AD if you tried to explain them 360 degrees. They wouldn't have been able to fathom it. I can't fathom it now, and I'm, in 2025. And I use this example because I believe that some things God leaves out. He doesn't tell you about it. And not everything, you can't find everything in the Bible, but you can find hints, things that reveal it. For example, nowhere in the Bible does God explain bacteria. Nowhere. But he gave laws of cleanliness to counteract its negative effects. Now we look back and we think, wow, look how far ahead they were in science, and they didn't know anything about bacteria. Up until the time that bacteria was discovered, everything was spiritual. You weren't sick, you got a demon. Okay? We're going to beat it out of you or something, or bleed you or something. I mean, that's the craziness that went on until they realized, hey, there's something that's microscopic, that's living, that makes us ill. And it's all over the place. And some of it is harmless, but some of it's not. Who would have understood if God had told you about it? Who would have understood it? You can't see it. Who would have understood it before 1676 when a guy named Antony van Leeuwenhoek, yeah, I remember him, he discovered it with a single lens microscope that he built himself in 1676. In a drop of water, he could see the bacteria in it. I mean, they might have understood mold, but they didn't understand it probably started from microscopic. I don't know what they thought of that. So God gives it to you in terms that you can understand no matter when you were born. You can draw some parallel. And a lot of times God just tells you to do something. He told them to wash with running water. He said, look, somebody dies, if there's an open container in their house, nobody eats out of that open container. When they found leprosy in the walls, man, they had to tear out the walls or burn down the place. Why? Because God understands, He made it. He understands it perfectly. But you have to accept it by faith. You know a lot of people wouldn't do that? The reason why the bubonic plague swept over Europe is because of the absolute filth that the Europeans lived in. They bred the rats, the trash, the garbage, their own human waste. They didn't dispose of it properly. And God demanded all that of the Jews, that they dispose of it properly. And because they didn't, they got, of course, now the Jews didn't have the problem because they didn't have that kind of filth. Verse 3, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. Verse 3 confirms that this is a worldwide judgment that's being held off until God's servants are sealed. This kind of tells us when this is taking place. Well, I can tell you this. It's happening before the middle of the week. Before the middle of the 70th week, before the seals of the previous chapter take effect. I didn't say were opened. I said take effect. Why? Because he's telling them, don't hurt anything. Don't hurt the trees. Don't, and all those seals and everything are going to, he's going to tear up something. It's going to destroy something. And then he says there, back to verse 2, he says, I saw another angel sitting from the east having the seal of the living God. This is where you find out that in the tribulation, not only does the devil has his mark, but God has a mark. And he is marking his servants, and we're going to find out these are Jews, but he marks these servants that they belong to him. They're sealed. They're sealed by, when he puts his name on them, that's sealing them. Look at Ezekiel chapter 9. Ezekiel chapter 9 and verse 1 to 4. He cried also in mine ears with a loud voice, saying, cause them that have charge over the city to draw near, even every man with his destroying weapon in his hand. And behold, 6 men came from the way of the higher gate. Now, I'll comment on that. I don't know too much about it, but I got a guess, but I'm probably wrong. Anyway, 6 men came from the way of the higher gate, which lieth toward the north, and every man a slaughter weapon in his hand. And one man among them was clothed with linen, with a writer's inkhorn by his side. And they went in and stood beside the brazen altar. When we were looking at chapter, and I'm going to read some more of it. And when we were looking at chapter 6, how many horsemen were there? There were 5. It's interesting here, there are 6 men, but one of them, he comes from a different direction, and he's clothed in linen. And I'm thinking that the other 5 that are left are the horsemen. I could be wrong, because every one of them is there to destroy. But this other one is not there to destroy. He's there to seal the servants of God in their foreheads. Look at verse 3. And the glory of God of Israel was gone up from the cherub whereupon he was to the threshold of the house. And he called to the man clothed with linen, which had the writer's inkhorn by his side. And the Lord said unto him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. So somebody is aware of what's happening. In fact, there are probably quite a few of them, evidently, that are aware of what's happening. And he's to go through the midst of Jerusalem, and he's to mark these men in their foreheads. Look at Revelation 14:1. Revelation 14:1. It says, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And here you have a man that is clothed in linen, that has a writer's inkhorn. Deuteronomy 32:5 says, they have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of his children. They have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of his children. They are perverse and a crooked generation. I can't read tonight. So not only is he telling you that there's a spot that's associated with the devil's kids, but there's a spot connected with God's kids. And it's their Father's name written in their foreheads. He's talking about these 144,000 in Revelation 14:1. I believe the man in linen And others believe that he's the Lord Jesus Christ, making a mid-trib appearance to mark all the Jews that sigh and cry for the abominations in Israel. The reason I say that is the fact that it makes a note that he is clothed in linen. Revelation 19:8, and he's talking about the bride here, but it says, and to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. Well, the reason you're clothed in that fine linen may be personal righteousness, but who is the righteousness of God? Jesus Christ. Romans chapter 10, verse 4. So I believe it's him making a mid-trib appearance, sealing those 144,000. And we're going to find out that there's 12,000 from each tribe. We're going to read it through here. I can't explain that except that all this time, through 2,000 years of history, God has preserved each of those tribes of how he wanted to preserve them. He has preserved them. And the fact that he could have 12,000, now maybe there's a lot more than 144,000, and he's got a lot to choose from. I don't know. I know it's a small remnant, but he has preserved the 12 tribes he wanted to. We'll see that there's a couple that are not mentioned there. But he has preserved what he wanted to preserve perfectly. Through all the wars, all the famines, all the being distributed around the world, even mingled among all these Gentiles, yet he has still preserved these tribes. There's no other way to explain it. Now he says there, let's start reading at verse 4. And we'll read to verse 8. In fact, that's all we're going to cover tonight, just the rest of this, and we'll be done. It says, I heard the number of them that were which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. And then he starts naming the tribes. Of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Reuben were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Gad were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Asher is what it is, were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Nephilim, that's Naphtali, I guess, were sealed 12,000. Some of this is just the translation coming over. Of the tribe of Manasseh, this would have been Manasseh was sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Simeon were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Levi were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Issachar were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Zebulun were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Joseph were sealed 12,000. And of the tribe of Benjamin were sealed 12,000. And if you go and highlight each one of those, you'll see that there are 12. They're clearly identified of who they are. First thing we need to see is the fact that they are 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. These are physical Jews. Physical Jews of the physical tribes of Israel. You can't get around that. It says it right there. Yet we got cults and religions that are trying to say, well, we're the 144, or, you know. It's just beyond me. You just got to tear the Bible apart to make it say what it doesn't say, and you can't do that. Isaiah 49, verse 5 and 6 says, and now saith the Lord that formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob again to him. Though Israel be not gathered, yet shall I be glorious in the eyes of the Lord, and my God shall be my strength. And he said, it is a light thing that thou shouldest be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob. This is Isaiah 49, 5 and 6. It is a light thing that thou shouldest be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved of Israel. He's preserved them. Through 2,000 years of beating them half to death, at the same time, he's preserved these tribes. He says, I will also give thee for a light to the Gentiles. He's talking about Jesus Christ here. That thou mayest be my salvation unto the end of the earth. And while he's being that light to the Gentiles and that salvation to the ends of the earth, he's preserved these tribes. Right there in front of you. I mean, that's a miracle in itself, man. Because you say, a lot of folks say, well, only Judah went back and all the other tribes. Well, that's ridiculous. You know, Barnabas was from Levi. You've got, what's the lady in, that's from Asher, along with Simeon. What was her name? Anna. Anna the prophetess, is that what she was? No, she was a widow serving in the temple, and she was from the tribe of Asher. I mean, there's some there. I mean, it may not name all 12 tribes or whatever, but they're there. They're there. And God's preserved them. Let's see here. Here's what they're not. They're not Seventh-day Adventists. They're not Jehovah's Witnesses. They're not Mormons, Catholics, or Calvinists. They are physical Jews preserved from the 12 tribes of Israel. That's what they are. That's what it says they are. And to teach anything different is heresy. And you got a lot of them. Anyone that teaches this replacement theology is going to end up making this probably the church or something like it, or a bunch of saints. They're going to steal it right away from Israel, steal it away from the Jew. Now, you got something?
It is Anna, a prophetess.
Okay. Oh, okay. There are, well, at least I'm not bonkers. There are 2 tribes that are replaced in this list. So when you go through this list, all of a sudden you notice, hold it now, what happened to Dan and what happened to Ephraim? They're gone. Well, Dan is replaced by Levi. Levi originally was not counted among the nations, but now that the priesthood has been superseded, Levi's counted. I mean, they wouldn't have been counted. But since another priesthood arose after the order of Melchizedek, look at Hebrews chapter 7, verse 11. Now, I'll tell you why it happened in just a second. We'll talk about these two, and then we'll talk about why they were replaced. Hebrews 7:11. If therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek and not to be called after the order of Aaron? So it's not that Levi is completely defunct in their duties as in the priesthood. They're still going to be doing things. But their priesthood has been replaced overall for a better priesthood. And whereas they were not counted back there in the Old Testament, when they were counted with the 12, they weren't counted. Now they are counted and are among the 12. Ephraim was one of the 2 sons of Joseph included as tribes. You had, see, they were not all the direct sons of Jacob. There were 2 tribes that were the sons of Joseph. Now, it's still in the line, obviously, but wasn't directly the son from Jacob's loins. It came from Joseph, and that was Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh's in the list, but Ephraim's not. And Ephraim's name is removed, and Joseph, his father, takes his spot, representing Ephraim's lineage. And the reason I say that is I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, who else did Joseph marry? Well, as far as I know, he only had 1 wife. As far as I know, he only had 2 kids. And Manasseh's in the list. So unless he's the tribe of 1, he would be the replacement name for the lineage of Ephraim. Ephraim was removed because God wasn't going to give that boy any credit. Or at least that tribe credit. So he gives it to Joseph. But I think that Joseph is definitely the one that's representing Ephraim's lineage. There's no other lineage for him to represent. Does that make sense? So between these 2 tribes, Dan and Ephraim, the greatest apostasy of Israel took place. They were responsible for the greatest apostasy in the entire. In fact, it's the apostasy. It is the seeds of apostasy that are planted and nurtured and then harvested in the New Testament, further on in the New Testament, and then it becomes that big tree where all the birds and the fowls of the air, it becomes huge. And the reason I say that is Dan is the tribe that adopted Baal worship. Remember, Dan ends up right up near Tyre and Zidon, where Jezebel is from Zidon. And they wind up, the city of Dan ends up right there in that area. And all of a sudden, you have all this Baalite religion, and I'll give you a few things here. They actually mingle with it. And they got their own apostasy going on, and they just kind of, it's amazing how you can see this thing forming in the Old Testament, and Christians they're blind to it. I don't know, they're reading the book of Judges, and all of a sudden their mind just goes blank. But they are reading, if they would read and believe the book of Judges, and read and believe what the Bible says, they would be able to spot their enemy right off the bat. They would be able to spot the worst enemy the church has ever had and still has. Says she's guilty of all the blood of the martyrs of Jesus Christ. But we can't spot her because they're not looking or they don't believe the scriptures. So Dan adopted Baal worship, and Ephraim was leading the 10 tribes, the 10 northern tribes, which went into the Baalite Babylonian religion wholesale. You find God continually going after Ephraim over this matter. Remember, Ephraim is the capital of the 10 northern tribes is Ephraim. He even refers to the 10 northern tribes as Ephraim because they were the head. And they never did get out of the Baalite thing, the Baalite religion. You remember Ahab? Northern 10 tribes. Jezebel? Northern 10 tribes. And this went on and on and on. Guess who goes into captivity first? Ephraim does. The 10 tribes do. So he ends up removing their name. Now, just going by what the scriptures say, here's what you have in the Old Testament that should cue you in on what's going on in this world right now. There are black-vested and robed priests. They have vestments in 2 Kings 10:22. They're cutting themselves in penance in 1 Kings 18:28. They use idols in their worship in 1 Kings 18:20. Probably that's about the golden calves. They give a name to this. I'm not reading them in order. That's the reason I'm messed up. They call a priest father, and the man calling him father is a younger man in Judges 8:19. Sunday worship to the sun god until high noon in 1 Kings 18:26. You say, don't you worship on Sunday? Nope, I worship on the first day of the week. The world calls that Sunday. The Bible never calls it Sunday. The Bible calls it the first day of the week. They bake cakes to the Queen of Heaven in Jeremiah 44:19. Jeremiah 44:19. Her names are Ashtaroth, Astarte, and the English version of that is Easter. The popes call her Mary. Queen of Heaven, call her Mary. God calls her the mother of harlots in Revelation 17:5. I mean, if you just take, and this is just a small list of them, but if you were to look at each and every one of those and how that thing came to be, you are looking at the nucleus or the beginnings of the Roman Catholic Church that is a mixture of Christianity and the Babylonian worship. And it's counterfeited to the entire world, and You know how you know that? Do you know how you know that? Nobody talks about Jesus Christ, and the whole world talks about a pope. I mean, the newscasters don't get on there and say, the Lord Jesus once said this. He said this over here in Matthew or in Luke. You never hear that. You hardly ever hear somebody quoting Scripture. Occasionally, on a commentator type thing, somebody might say something. But you got newscasters, they're up there talking about this Pope and the Pope, and he's an American. They give this background, and I mean, when the white smoke came out, it's like, oh, what's going on? Doesn't the Bible say that which is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God? They don't give Jesus Christ those accolades. They don't give Jesus Christ that attention. They don't give His church that attention, but they give that church the attention. I mean, when you see them there with their black mark, the black mark they got on their forehead on Ash Wednesday, the black mark, the black mark. Christians dumber than a rock all over this country, feeding right into it, going to go right into it, and they're going to. That's what he says. He says to come out of her. I mean, he's talking to his children. He says, come out of her. Have no part with her. Because God's getting ready to pour His wrath on that church, on that woman. He's going to destroy her down. And if you happen to be in it, you'll take the hit with them. And I'm going to talk about Christians, but anyone that's, sad thing about Christians is there are Christians that are a part of that church. And I can't imagine how embarrassed and upset they're going to be when they find out, you were sitting over in the horse church. Not going to go well. Okay, we're going to stop there. Is there anything anybody else has got? Something they saw maybe? Question? Now I got some questions for you. In Selah Petra, okay, these 144,000, let's say he seals them from those that are there at Rock City. Good possibility. Are they the only ones left? Because some people said that is the remnant. That is the only ones left, 144,000. And I'm thinking, 144,000 exactly, 12,000 from each tribe exactly. Now it doesn't say, and we're going to find out, it doesn't say that they're all male till you get to the 14th chapter. But when it says they're all male in the 14th chapter, they're in heaven. Why wouldn't there be male and females that are sealed? I'm just saying, I don't know why there wouldn't be. Could be. And if they're the only ones, you try to tell me none of the females made it at all? So here's the other thing. Do we have any pictures or examples of something in the New Testament that might explain the scope of what these guys are going to be doing? And the only one that comes to mind that I think is a good type is Philip. And the reason I say that is Philip the evangelist is transported. Because I'm thinking, if they're in Selah Petra, how are they going to get to England? How are they going to fly? I don't have a mark. Can I still fly? How are they going to get there? And yet God transported Philip and put him where He needed him. What? To win somebody. So I think that these 144,000 are going to not only have signs and wonders, but they're going to do exploits. They're going to do some amazing things by the power of God. And I don't know if He's just going to transport them all over there. I don't know. But so they can't do it from they can't do it from Rock City. Yeah, there's a portal. I don't know. We'll see. If you can think of some other examples, even in the Old Testament, because there's going to be something back there. You know, when he tells those 12 disciples to go over the cities of Israel in type, because he knows that's not it, and that's not the end, but in type, it's like he's commissioning those 144,000. And what do they do going? They got signs and wonders. They're able to heal. They're sustained supernaturally. They're protected. And that brings up the other thing. Do they get beheaded? Well, we'll see if we can figure that out when we get through here, if some of them can be killed. Huh? Well, there, yeah, you got Moses and Elijah. Now, Moses and Elijah, I believe, are there in Rock City, protecting Rock City, and plaguing the earth and all kinds of things going on from there. But even they get beheaded, right? The Antichrist overcomes them. So anyway, there's a lot of questions that some of them I don't have answers to, but maybe we'll come across them here. Anybody else got anything?